There was a man who climbed the mountain carrying the weight of a broken life. He was not a soldier. He was not a priest. He was simply a man who had lost too much to keep pretending that everything was all right. His hands, weathered by years of labor under the Galilean sun, trembled that morning, not from the cold, but from something deeper, a hunger that no bread could satisfy. You know that tremor, that feeling of standing on the threshold of something you don't yet understand, but that you sense with all your soul. That moment when the world you knew crumbles, and the silence that remains feels too heavy to carry alone. What do you do when heaven is silent? What do you do when you've prayed until you're out of words, and all you hear is the echo of your own pain bouncing off the walls of your heart? That morning, over 2,000 years ago, thousands of people climbed a hill in the region of Galilee. They came from everywhere, from dusty villages, from lake shores, from bustling markets that had stolen their hope coin by coin. They came with feet covered in dust and hearts covered in questions. Sitting on the green hillside, with his hands open on his knees, with eyes that seemed to contain all the world's pain, and at the same time, all the light of heaven. The folds of his linen cloak billowed gently in the morning breeze, and when he opened his mouth, the words that came out were like none the world had ever heard before. They were not the words of a ruler promising power. They were not the words of a philosopher offering theories. They were the words of someone who knows your name and has seen your tears in the dark. Today, we are going to step into that sacred moment together. We are going to walk through the most powerful lessons of the Sermon on the Mount. We are going to discover why those words, spoken on a Galilean hill 2 millennia ago, still have the power to transform shattered lives into altars of hope. Because when heaven is silent, it is because God wants to be heard in the stillness. Stay. What you're about to hear could forever change the way you understand your own suffering. If you too seek answers in the deepest places of the scriptures, if you want to understand the mysteries that transform pain into faith, then subscribe now and turn on the notification bell, because every day a new revelation awaits you. It was the first year of the public ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. News of his signs in Capernaum and the villages of Galilee had spread like living water throughout the region. The sick had been healed. Those living in the darkness of the soul had found light. And the people, hungry for something real, something true in a world dominated by empty religion and the oppression of the Roman Empire, flocked to him in ever-growing crowds. Matthew the evangelist records it with these precise words. Seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Matthew 5:1 and 2. That detail matters. He went up on the mountain. In the tradition of the people of Israel, the mountain held a meaning that went far beyond geography. Moses received the law on Mount Sinai. Elijah heard the voice of God on Mount Horeb. Mountains were the places where heaven and earth touched, where human time and divine eternity brushed against each other for an instant. And now, on that hill covered in green grass by the Sea of Galilee, something was happening that would make all other mountain moments pale in comparison. The Sermon on the Mount was not simply a moral lesson. It was the constitution of a kingdom that is not of this world. It was the declaration of a new way of being human. It was, in essence, the voice of God piercing the silence of centuries to tell broken humanity, I am still here, and I have come to show you the way home. Imagine that moment. The morning sun rising over the lake's horizon, painting the water in gold and silver, the murmur of thousands of people gradually falling silent, as if something inside them knew that something was about to happen that no ear had ever heard before. The soft wind bringing the scent of water and life from the lake. And then he speaks, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:3. The first word he utters is a word no one expected: happy, fortunate, favored. But those he calls blessed are not the rich, nor the powerful, nor those who have everything figured out. They are the poor in spirit, those who have reached the limit of their own strength, those who have exhausted their internal resources and realize they cannot save themselves. Those people, Jesus says, are the closest to the kingdom of heaven. Can you hear the weight of those words? He is not talking about a future distant blessing that might arrive one day. He is talking about the present. He is saying that at this very moment, in your fragility, in your inadequacy, in that place where you have no answers left, heaven is closer to you than ever, because those who are full of themselves have no room for God. But those who have been emptied by pain, they are ready to be filled by something that has no equal in this world. The leather sandals of those men and women brushed against the dry earth as they moved closer to listen. Their hand-woven wool tunics, in natural earthy colors of ochre and beige and brown, billowed in the morning breeze. Their faces, marked by labor and by life, reflected something rarely seen in those difficult times. A fragile, newborn hope that didn't quite know what to lean on yet, but was already beginning to grow like a seed underground, invisible to the eye, but alive with an intensity that no storm could extinguish. But there was something no one dared to say out loud that morning. There was a question floating in the air, like the smoke from the morning sacrifice in the Temple of Jerusalem, visible but without a definite shape, impossible to grasp with one's hands. If God loves us, why do we suffer so much? If heaven sees the poor, those who mourn, those who are persecuted, why doesn't it intervene? Why does it allow injustice to prosper and the righteous to be crushed? That question was not new. It was as old as the first human cry that ever rose toward heaven without receiving an immediate answer. It was the question of Job lying in the ashes. It was the question of David fleeing through the desert. It was the question of millions of men and women throughout history who have loved God sincerely and yet have been broken by the weight of life. And it remains your question. I know this because it is the question of everyone who has ever loved someone and lost them, of everyone who has believed with genuine faith and yet seen their dreams crumble, of everyone who has prayed in the darkness of the night and waited for an answer that took so long to arrive that the heart almost lost the strength to keep waiting. The enemy knows that question very well. He doesn't need to convince you to abandon your faith all at once. He is too subtle for that. He only needs to plant the smallest doubt in your heart, the softest, the most reasonable of all. What if God isn't really there? What if all this suffering has no purpose? That doubt, if you water it long enough, can grow until it obscures the sun. The enemy bet that you would give up. God bet that you would endure. And that morning on the Galilean hill, Jesus was revealing something that would forever change the terms of that bet. Because the Beatitudes are not promises for when everything is fine. They are promises for when everything is broken. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Matthew 5:4. Blessed are those who mourn, not those who have already overcome the pain, not those who have already found the way out of the tunnel, but those who are in the midst of weeping, in the densest darkness of their grief, in that place where words of human comfort sound empty because no human being can reach the depth of what you are feeling. Those, Jesus says, shall be comforted. Not just any kind, not the fragile and temporary comfort the world offers, but the comfort that comes from the only source that can reach as far as human pain goes, the very presence of God. But the inner struggle that morning was not only felt by those who came from afar. Among the crowd was a young man who had lost his father just a few weeks prior. His eyes, though fixed on Jesus, carried within them that particular shadow known only to those who have looked into a grave and had to learn to live with what they saw. Where was God when his father was dying? Where was divine justice when the Romans collected taxes that left his family without enough to eat? Where was the light when the night was longer than any hope? These questions are not questions of unbelief. They are questions of faith that refuses to surrender even when it hurts. They are questions of someone who still believes that heaven has answers, even if heaven seems mute. And it is exactly in that sacred tension, in that space between the screaming pain and the heaven that seems silent, where Jesus pronounces the most revolutionary words any teacher had ever dared to say. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Matthew 5:5. Meekness in the ancient world was synonymous with weakness. The Romans despised the meek. The system of honor and shame that dominated that culture valued strength, the violent response to insult, the ability to impose one's own will on others. And Jesus says, the meek will inherit the earth, not the warriors, not the politicians, not those who accumulate power through force, those who choose peace when they could choose revenge, those who absorb the blow without returning the hatred, those who have enough strength to not need to demonstrate it. This meekness is not passivity. It is the highest form of strength that exists, the kind born from trusting that God will fight the battles we cannot win. True faith is born when human hope dies, and the dark-eyed young man, the one carrying the weight of his grief on the side of that hill, began to feel something he could not explain with words, a crack in the armor of his despair. A light so small it was almost invisible, but which was undoubtedly light. Because when God speaks, even a single word can illuminate a darkness that has lasted a lifetime. You who are here even now, you who recognize God's voice in the silence, do not let this message be lost. There are many souls seeking this same light. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Because what comes next can change your perspective forever. The wind changed direction. Or perhaps it wasn't the wind. Perhaps it was something more inside the chest of every person listening on that hillside, covered in green grass and Galilean spring wildflowers. Jesus kept speaking, and every word was like a drop of water on dry stone, small in appearance, but with the capacity to slowly transform hardness into life. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Matthew 5:6. Hunger and thirst. Jesus did not choose those words by accident. In that arid land, under that relentless sun, hunger and thirst were not abstract metaphors. They were realities they knew in their bodies, in their parched mouths, in their aching stomachs. They were sensations that consumed you from within until you could think of nothing else. That, Jesus says, is how your longing for God's justice should be. Not like an occasional wish, not like a thought that appears every now and then, but like a need so visceral, so deep, so desperate, as the hunger of someone who hasn't eaten for days, or the thirst of someone walking under the desert sun. And to that hunger, Jesus says, there will be an answer. They will be satisfied, not halfway, not with crumbs, satisfied, filled to the brim with that which the heart most deeply longs for, justice, truth, righteousness, the presence of a God who sees and does not forget. And then the moment arrived that no one expected. Jesus' voice subtly changed tone. It didn't get louder, it became more intimate, as if suddenly he wasn't speaking to thousands of people, but to each one individually, looking them directly in the eyes across time and space. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Matthew 5:7. Ashes are the altar of the one who still waits. That phrase resonated in the heart of the dark-eyed young man like soft thunder. He had thought of his pain as an end, like a wall that had no door. But suddenly, in that moment of revelation that can only come from on high, he saw something different. His ashes were not the end, they were the altar. The place where God works, the place where resurrection begins. not in the blooming gardens of a comfortable life, but in the scorched earth of what was destroyed. Because God has a particular way of choosing the most desolate places to reveal his most radiant glory. Heaven had not been silent. Heaven had been speaking all along, in that silent language that only those who have learned to quiet the noise of their own broken expectations can hear. He did not punish you. He called you into the whirlwind, just as he called Job, as he called Moses in the desert of Midian, as he called Elijah in the cave of Mount Horeb. That space of silence and brokenness was not abandonment. It was preparation. It was the process that precedes all true revelation. And as the sun continued to rise in the Galilean sky, while birds sang among the mustard bushes growing on the hillside, as the wind from the lake brought with it the clean scent of water, created to give life, the Sermon on the Mount continued to unfold like a mantle of light over everything that human suffering had tried to obscure. Now I want to speak directly to you, not to the crowd in Galilee, not to the characters of history, to you who are here in this moment, who have reached this point in the journey carrying something that perhaps no one else can see, but that you feel with every breath. You who lost something you thought you would never lose. You who prayed with all the faith you had, and yet the answer was delayed. You who smile in public, but in the privacy of your darkest nights, wonder if God really listens. Jesus is looking at you from that Galilean hill across time, and he tells you something that no system of success, no human philosophy, and no voice of the world could ever tell you with the same authority. Not when everything is resolved. Not when the trial has ended, not when you finally understand the why of everything that happened to you. Now, in this moment, in the middle of this, because the economy of the kingdom of God works in a way completely opposite to the world's economy. The world says you are blessed when you have, when you can, when you achieve, when you accumulate. Jesus says you are blessed when you depend, when you need, when you recognize that without God, you can do nothing. That is the first living lesson of the Sermon on the Mount. Poverty of spirit is not a condition you must overcome to reach God. It is the doorway into the kingdom. It is the honest acknowledgement that you are a being made for something greater than yourself, and that no self-sufficiency, no human achievement, and no system of self-control can fill the space that only God can fill. Therein lies the most beautiful paradox of all of Christ's teaching. Those who feel the farthest away are in fact the ones who are closest, because when you have nothing left of your own to trust in, then you can trust in him with everything. Think of the fisherman who that morning had left his nets by the lake and climbed the hill. His hands smelled of fish and sea salt. His rough wool cloak was patched in several places. He had no fortune. He had no influence. He had no resource to offer except his presence and his hunger for something true. And Jesus looked at him and said, "The kingdom of heaven belongs to someone like you." Can you receive that? Can you open your hands, even if they are empty, and allow that promise to fall into them like rain on parched land? Because there is a difference between knowing this truth in your head and letting it descend to the place where it truly hurts, to the deepest corner of your heart, where you keep the questions you don't dare to ask out loud. The meekness that Jesus proclaimed blessed is not passive resignation in the face of injustice. It's the silent strength of one who has decided that the peace of God is worth more than the victory of any human conflict. It is the wisdom of one who knows that heaven always has the last word, even if heaven takes its time to speak. And those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they are the ones who have not grown accustomed to the world's pain. Those who are still outraged by innocent suffering, those who have not learned to look the other way, those, Jesus says, shall be satisfied, because their hunger is proof that they are made for a better world, and that world will come. But there is another lesson that the Sermon on the Mount unfolds with a depth we often overlook. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Matthew 5:7. In that first century culture, mercy was a feminine virtue, considered by many to be a sign of weakness. Men of honor did not show mercy to their enemies. The religious leaders of that time meted it out carefully, calculating who deserved it and who did not. And Jesus inverts that entire value system in a single phrase. He does not say that mercy is a noble feeling we should cultivate occasionally. He says that the mercy you give determines the mercy you receive, that there is a direct connection between your ability to extend compassion toward others and your ability to receive God's compassion. This is not a commercial transaction. It is a spiritual law. The heart that closes itself to mercy toward others also closes itself to God's mercy, not because God withdraws it, but because the hardened heart can no longer receive it. Like a cracked vessel that cannot hold water no matter how abundant the spring may be. And then comes this breathtaking statement, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Matthew 5:8. Two words that in the ancient world carried the full weight of human hope. Because the face of God was what had been lost in Eden. It was what separated the human being from their deepest origin. To see God was the longing that no temple, no sacrifice, and no religious system could completely satisfy. And Jesus says that this vision belongs to those with a pure heart, not the brilliant-minded, not those with perfect doctrine, not those with an impeccable reputation, those with a pure heart. Those who have learned to live without deception, without hidden agendas, without the mask the world demands we wear to survive. And that applies to your life today, here, in this moment of history in which you were called to live. In a world that prizes image over substance, where how you appear matters more than who you are, where social networks and the value of the visible have become the new idols of a civilization hungry for depth, Jesus continues to say the same thing he said on that Galilean hill. The vision of God belongs to those who dare to be real, those who truly weep instead of faking strength, those who acknowledge their brokenness instead of building facades of self-sufficiency. Those who dare to say to God, "I have nothing to offer except who I am, and who I am is broken." Those are the ones who see God, not because God hides from others, but because only those who have emptied their hands can receive what he wants to give. The story of the Sermon on the Mount does not end with the Beatitudes. It ends with an image Jesus builds carefully, like a craftsman working wood until he finds the shape hidden within. You are the salt of the earth. Matthew 5:13. You are the light of the world. Matthew 5:14. You are not the political solution to the problem of the Roman Empire. You are not the army that will liberate Israel by force. You are not the recipients of a promise of material prosperity that will place you above your enemies. You are salt, and you are light. Salt in the ancient world was a precious commodity. It was used to preserve, to flavor, to keep meat from spoiling. A small amount of salt could completely transform what it touched. It didn't need to be abundant to be powerful. It only needed to be authentic and light. Light does not argue with the darkness. It doesn't explain why it should withdraw. It simply exists, and the darkness gives way. A single candle lit in a completely dark room transforms the entire space. Not halfway, not in part. Darkness, by definition, cannot coexist with light. It must retreat. Jesus was telling that crowd of fishermen, peasants, women with children in their arms, men with calloused hands from working the fields, the sick who had found healing, and hearts that had found hope. You will not be that when you perfect yourselves. You won't be that when you have learned enough theology or when you have overcome all your problems. You are that now. In your fragility, in your brokenness, in your hunger for something true. And what does this mean for you? It means the suffering you have gone through is not simply a wound to be hidden. It can become the salt that preserves others from the same pain you know. It can become the light that shines for those walking through the same dark tunnel you once walked. Your story did not end with the brokenness. The brokenness was the beginning of the most important story. Think of David, a young shepherd without any military resource, pursued by a king who wanted him dead, living in caves in the desert for years, wondering where the promise God had made to him was. And from that broken David, from that man who knew betrayal, exile, and deep pain, the Psalms emerged. The words that continue to comfort shattered hearts 3,000 years later. Your pain has that potential, not because pain is good in itself, but because God has the extraordinary ability to take what the enemy designed to destroy you and turn it into the material with which he builds something that blesses far more people than you can imagine. Ashes are the altar of the one who still waits. And the one who still waits upon their ashes, the one who does not abandon faith even though the fire has consumed all they had. That is the one who discovers that God has been working all along on what the fire could not burn. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the noise of the world grow quiet. Let that part of you that is always running, always calculating, always defending itself, rest. You are here, in this moment. And that is no coincidence. There is a truth that the Sermon on the Mount has woven through every one of its words, a truth I want you to take with you when this video ends and the screen goes dark. God does not measure your value by your performance. He knows you by name. You are not the total of your failures. You are not the sum of your wounds. You are not what the world has said you are in its cruelest moments. You are a being made for the light, who sometimes walks through darkness, not because God has abandoned you, but because darkness is part of the path that leads to a light that has no equal. Let us pray together. Lord, today we recognize that we are poor in spirit, that we have reached the limit of our own strength more times than we can count, that we have wept in the dark without understanding why, that we have hungered and thirsted for something the world could not give us. And today we hear your voice telling us that in that place, in that poverty, in that weeping, in that hunger, we are blessed. Give us pure hearts that can see you. Give us the meekness of those who trust that you fight the battles we cannot win. Give us the mercy that flows toward others as a sign that we have received yours. And when heaven seems silent, help us remember that God's silence is never abandonment. If this word touched your heart, if you recognize that God speaks in the whirlwind, leave just one word in the comments: I will wait, so that others going through the same trial may know they are not alone. And if you wish to continue this journey through sacred mysteries, subscribe now, turn on the notification bell, and allow each revelation to find you at the right moment. Because God is preparing something you have not yet seen. The sun began to descend over the Galilean horizon. Shadows lengthened over the green hillside, where thousands of people had heard words that no human ear had ever heard before. Little by little, the crowd began to disperse, each person carrying within themselves something that did not exist when they climbed the hill that morning. Small, fragile, invisible to the eyes of those who do not know what it is, but alive with an intensity that no storm could extinguish, because the seeds God plants do not die in winter. They survive underground, in the darkness that no one sees, growing with a patience that surpasses all human understanding. The dark-eyed young man walked down the hill back to his village. His feet found the dirt road he had known since childhood. The lake shimmered to his right with the last golden reflections of the afternoon. And something inside him had changed so deeply that he did not yet have words to describe it. Heaven had not forgotten him. The pain he carried was not the final chapter of his story. It was the chapter that would make the following chapters make sense. Because God does not write stories without redemption, and redemption always arrives, though sometimes we are slow to recognize it because we expected it to take a different form. The Sermon on the Mount was not an academic lecture on abstract virtues. It was the most radical declaration that God's love has ever made in human language. That the kingdom of heaven does not belong to those who have everything figured out, but to those who have learned to trust the one who holds everything in his hands, even when our hands are empty. True faith is born when human hope dies. And that faith, the one born in the darkest moment, in the place where no arguments of our own, personal resources or strength to go on remain, that is the faith that moves mountains. Not because faith is powerful in itself, but because it is anchored in someone who is. The one who pronounced the Beatitudes on that Galilean hill was not simply a wise teacher who had read much and reflected deeply. He was the Word made flesh. He was the Word that existed before time began, dwelling in a human body to tell you from within your own condition. I know what it is to feel this, and I am the answer. Not a theoretical answer, not a religious formula, a presence. A presence that walks with you in the desert, that calls you in the whirlwind, that finds you in the cave of your deepest loneliness and whispers in the profoundest silence, something that no noise of the world can drown out.
Peace be with you.
I am here,
There is enough
and this is not the end. He did not explain suffering. He revealed himself in the midst of it, and that is the most powerful lesson of the Sermon on the Mount. Not just the words he spoke, but the fact that he descended from that eternal throne to climb that hill of earth and stone and Galilean grass, and sit among us and look us in the eye, and tell us that the kingdom of heaven has room for the broken, for those who mourn, for those who hunger, for those who do not yet understand but still believe. When heaven is silent, it is because God wants to be heard in the stillness, and that silence, if you listen to it carefully with an open heart and empty hands, always says the same thing.